can take us higher. There is a word that can soothe our soul, heal our hearts and fill all desires. It's a word that can make us whole. Shalom, shalom. There is a word that can move tall mountains and raise a valley up to the sky. It sings all songs and paints all pictures. It raises our souls up high. Shalom, 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 enough to hear the sound. Maybe it will bless the earth until we shout out loud. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom, I am Rabbi Shaul Praver. You're watching Rabbi Rock. Welcome. Today we have a very fine guest, Joan Polzin, artist, and we're going to see her work momentarily. She has an interesting story. She actually has 2 master's degrees in psychiatric social work and was working right here in the Garner Institute. That's a prison here in Newtown, Connecticut. And a little light bulb went off, and she wanted to return to her interest in art at age 59, and she went back to school for it and got a master's in fine arts at WestCon. And she hadn't really planned at the time to get into the subject matter, but she wound up covering victims of terrorism in Israel and the events of the post-events of the war of 2007 with Lebanon. And she has a show that's coming out, Joan Polzin does, on May 29th and it's running from 12 to 2:30 at the Easton Library, and it will be available for viewing for 6 weeks starting on May 29th. This is 2010. So welcome, Joan Polzin, to Rabbi Rock.
Thank you.
Yes, pleasure to have you here. And I think the way we met was I had some old lists at the synagogue, and we had just built a new building, so we were calling everybody and their grandmother to come out for the, for the opening, and you happened to be on one of these lists, and I called you. And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that was one of the miracles that happened in relation to this project that I'm working on, and that was that I had an idea about 4 days or 5 days prior to your phone call of doing artwork to show the full story that I didn't feel was being shown in the media. And my idea was that the pictures that you see on television and in the papers have so much more, sometimes more memory impact
than the actual article.
And I've been noticing for many years a very strong bias, which has been it's been found to be so by organizations that follow the media, but it was something that was bothering me for a long time. So I had this idea, and I had never been to Israel, and I really had no idea how I would go about it. It didn't seem like a really practical idea, but the idea was that maybe there's something I could actually do. And then
I introduced you to a couple of people, right?
Right.
Shlomo, he's a social worker also.
4 days later, I got a phone call from you, and I had never met you before.
So I called at the right time.
Yes, and I told you my idea, and you said, I'll help you.
Okay.
So you gave me contacts in Israel and contacts here that knew people in Israel. And over the next couple of months, I planned a trip to Israel using email and the internet.
What inspired you to paint on this subject?
Well, it was my feelings about what I considered media bias that inspired me to do this. But I think that it really goes back to my childhood. I was born in 1944, actually on D-Day. And
wow. June 6th.
That's right.
1944.
That's right. And when I was a child, there was a lot of video footage of the concentration camps on television.
Yes.
And of the Holocaust. And it was riveting to me, and I mean, I must have been about 7 or 8 or 9 when I saw a lot of it on television, maybe 9 or 10. But so I remember it very well, and it was just so infuriating what was done to innocent people, and coming from a Jewish family and a Jewish community, I identified, and I felt a sense of outrage. And I started to feel that sense of outrage again watching the media portrayal of the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis up until today.
You call your show Two Israels. Why did you pick that name?
Well, because during my trip to Israel, I really didn't see any acts of terrorism. It was after the summer war, and there were people who were willing to talk to me about things that happened to them during the war, and also some people I met who were actually lost daughters in suicide bomb attacks. But I didn't really have photographs of these things, and I didn't really see anything happening. But I saw Israel, and it was my first trip to Israel. I had never been to Israel. So I saw the beautiful side of Israel, the peaceful side of Israel,
and
the wonderful side of the hospitable people that I stayed with. And I just decided I would base my paintings on things I've seen and some photographs that were taken by other people that had more to do with actual terrorism, and on people I've met and their stories.
Okay.
So I've covered both aspects.
I want to, before long, I want to get your beautiful artwork out to our viewers. I'd like to first take a look at this very peaceful scene of the Sea of the Galilee, which is a very beautiful painting that I think anybody would want to have on their wall. And I'm a fisherman, so I know what you were capturing there, and that's a fishing boat. And the light and the color is really magnificent. It must have been kind of close to sunset, was it? And so this was part of your itinerary on your trip. And you spent one night. This is up in Tiberias, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Very fond memories of that place. St. Peter's Fish, and very, very nice work. I like your and appreciate your talent and the use of color and texture. Yeah. And also we have a picture of Leron, and she is the sister of the victim of a terrorist attack, and that's Vered. So if we could cue up the picture of Leron, who you have a little story about that.
Yes. I stayed with a family in Afula, and they were kind enough to introduce me and set up a meeting for me with the parents of Vered, who was killed in a suicide bomb attack.
Mm-hmm.
There were 8 students waiting to go home on a bus
Mm-hmm.
from school,
Mm-hmm.
and Vered was among them, and also a friend of hers. And Leron was 5 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
She was 5 years old when this happened, and she was with them,
Mm-hmm.
but she went into a candy store to get a soda,
Mm-hmm.
and so she was spared. Her
Mm-hmm.
life was spared, but she was a witness to the death of her sister
Mm-hmm.
and the sister's friend and the other students and the bus driver who were killed. It was a car bomb that was blown
Yes.
up by a Palestinian terrorist.
Yeah, I see. Mm-hmm.
And I met the parents, and I met Leron, and I took some pictures of Leron at the meeting, and there was just something about the expression in her face in one of the pictures that just showed the depth of
Melancholy.
melancholy and loss, and you know, especially being at a meeting to talk about the incident
Mm-hmm.
with
Now,
me.
you know,
They were so generous to share with me. And
Mm-hmm. Now, you were a little surprised when you got there. You were expecting, and you wanted certainly, people to talk about the subject, but you found that they didn't really want to talk about it.
well, I found that it wasn't central to their outlook and their mentality, and for me it was pretty central because that was my goal and my project and my purpose of going, although they were very cooperative, and they did talk about the war, and I met several people who sat down with me and told me some really tragic and horrifying stories of things that had happened to them, but the focus of life there is not about war and terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
It's about life.
Mm-hmm.
And that was why I call it Two Israels, because there's the Israel that's always under threat, and the threat is growing. You know, even today, the missiles are becoming bigger and have
More
longer
precise.
range and more precise. But people don't live like that. They just, you know, they're just wonderful people, and I had a great time there, and I saw so many beautiful places. And
But every sort of building has a bomb shelter, doesn't it?
well, I stayed with a couple in Haifa, Dr. Nona Kovler and her husband, who was a scientist at the university there, and they showed me the bomb shelter in their building.
Mm-hmm.
And as I traveled around the town, I would see bomb shelters in the middle of a playground with the playground equipment around it, and they're just all over.
Sort of nonchalant, but
And I
that's
think
just like a fire hydrant or a
it's just
sewer.
actually, yeah, it's just, it's one of the reasons that more people aren't killed by the rockets is because they're so well prepared.
Mhm.
But that is part of their life, and
Sure.
it's always there. And
Sometimes they have to use the
And
bomb
some-
shelter.
yeah.
But life goes on, the show goes on.